I didn't sleep well last night. My ears are still ringing, and I'm kicking myself for not putting in my earplugs. 30 rounds are loud enough, but when you're shooting from inside a boarded up church, the report is deafening. I went through another 67 rounds of ammunition, and if this keeps up, soon I'll have to use my over-under 12 gauge. I wish I'd bought more ammo before coming here, but I didn't expect to be fighting a war over God's house, much less one where my opponents are ghoulish fiends of the night. Oh well, hindsight is 20/20 after all. A couple grey-painted helicopters flew over shortly after sunrise, but they didn't seem to see me jumping up and down, waving my arms. Strange, I've never seen army helicopters with that kind of paint job. A flat, slate grey with no logo or insignia anywhere on the craft. Either way, they flew off toward New Wilderness and I didn't see them again. Most of the morning I spent burning bodies. The fiends attacked both the abandoned jeep in the road and my sedan on day one, doing so much damage to the tires that driving them is out of the question. But I still have enough gas to make a hot bonfire, and I had set aside a pair of clothes just for corpse disposal, due to the stench of burning flesh working its way into everything. When at last I got around to opening the shed door, I found the creature sitting in the far corner, her head on her knees, both arms obscuring her face. It was such a human pose that I almost stepped into the darkness to ask if she needed any help. As soon as the door banged on the side of the shed, however, she darted up on all fours and snarled at me in distrust. "I'm sorry, alright?" I pushed a wooden tray of fried ground beef into the shadows and set a small plastic bucket full of spring water beside it. "Here, I brought breakfast." She stiffened at the side of the oak board I'd used for a plate and waited until I backed away to creep forward, like she was hunting a rabbit in the grass. After carefully sniffing at the food, the fiend grabbed big handfuls of the beef and stuffed it into her mouth, bits crumbling out both sides of her lips. She licked the board clean, turned the water bucket, picked it up with both hands in a surprising show of intelligence, and drained it to the dregs. "Okay, so now we know you don't mind cooked food. That's a good sign." I watched from the safety of the sunlit yard, lost in curious thought. These creatures were primal enough to be kept at bay by boards and gunshots, but intelligent enough to rip at my car's tires, as well as try to free their trapped companion in the shed. They mostly walked on all fours, similar to apes, but occasionally they could stand upright and even run that way for short distances. I'd seen them drink from puddles after a hard rain, and even dig with their hands for roots and wild onions to gnaw on when they couldn't get any raw meat. It wasn't exactly organized farming, but still it was close enough for these things. If the fiends had ever been able to speak in human words, they didn't anymore, but their screams and clicks seemed to stand in for that, like they were trying to duplicate something too advanced for them to comprehend. They tended to travel in small groups, usually a cluster of several females with one or two males. The males bringing down bigger game while the females dug for roots, all of them splitting the food with relative equality. I'd never seen them mate, and never spotted any offspring or pregnant females, and there was a definite lack of old ones as well. There was no indication at all as to where these things came from, or how they came to be. Clearly, light hurts them, but it also fascinates them. The creatures are drawn to artificial sources like moths to a flame. As macabre as they were, I wanted to understand these beings more closely, and now, at least, I had a chance to try and make scientific headway with this one. Once she dropped the empty water bucket and started licking the grease off her fingers, I produced my next equipment, a small, dry-ease whiteboard. As I lifted the board, the fiend's wide eyes widened in alarm and she scrambled backwards, shielding her eyes with angry jitters. No, it's not a mirror, look, see? I turned it on myself so that she could see there was no reflection, no harm to be inflicted by the big sheet of plastic. Cautiously, she cocked her mildew-infested head to one side and waited. Uncapping a black marker, I drew a stick figure man on the board and showed it to her. See, that's me, a person. People, understand? Both hazy white eyes seemed to glitter in a strange new hunger, and the fiend inched forward a little, with soft clicking noises under her breath. Good, she was curious too. I sketched another creature on all fours in a box with long dark hair. And this is you, see? A wide, square-toothed grin stretched over her face, still as unnerving as it had been on day one. But somehow, I didn't sense any malice this time. It was one of recognition, a flicker of something else, and that excited me with the possibilities. Bolstered by her interest, I drew more figures like her all over the board. These are others, just like you. They come from the trees over the hill. My sketches were child level in their detail, but they seemed to get the point across. The creature crawled right up to the edge of the light and sat, eyes focused on my scribbles. Even if the communication was one-sided for now, it was a start. The end of my marker squeaked over the white plastic as I drew an empty ring of trees on the other side of the hill and pointed to it. Is this where you came from? Is this your home? She stared at me blankly. How do I make you understand if you can't even speak? Home. I pointed to the church behind me and then to my chest. That's my home. Home where you sleep. Sleep, see? I folded my hands under my head and lay down on the grass in an exaggerated sleeping pose. To my surprise, the fiend copied me, laying parallel to myself in the shadows, her grimy hands cupped under her head in an exact mirror of my actions. She smiled and chittered, as if asking for my approval. Cool. Despite the eeriness of the entire situation, I couldn't help but grin back. That's it. Very good. That is where I sleep. My home. Where do you sleep? I sat up and inked scrubby pine trees and bare oaks all over the board, pointing to them, then to her several times. She stared at it, then at me with another blank expression. Disappointed, I sighed. Maybe I was asking too much of this strange creature. After all, they couldn't speak, and even if they looked far more human than monkeys, it took most trained apes a long time to learn some of these concepts. Time that we don't have. Lurching out of her frozen state, the fiend scrabbled away into the dark and returned with a small stick, clenching the broken twig in her fist like an oversized, nightmarish toddler. She scratched it over the muddy floor, etching bizarre markings into the thin film of muck that had always covered the floorboards. My eyebrows almost jumped right off my face. What the? Her scrapings were mostly legible swirls and slashes, but there were a few definite shapes that I could make out, carved into the dried patch of brown mud. Rough leaving pines surrounded a long straight set of gouge that looked like a road, complete with a skinny little stick that resembled a road to one side. Dark stick figures, wavy and asymmetrical, lined the road, and a single, enormous figure towered over all of them. It had both my arms outstretched, almost like the old fire and brimstone preachers of the early 1900s, with what looked like twisted branches covering its face and head. Long lines representing either beams of light or something else radiated off its four-fingered hands, and the little figures on the ground seemed to be bent low in worship, the lines extending from their heads to the clawed fingers of the big one. A deep, itchy chill slithered through my blood as I stared into the face of the tall figure, and for some reason the faint echoes of static hissed through my ears, as though the drawing itself stared back from the dirty floor. What in God's green earth is that? I looked up to find the creature watching me, the two of us separated by a few feet of air, only the line of sunlight on the ground keeping us apart. She wore a neutral, curious gaze, and both milk-white eyes bored into mine, as though she was trying to figure out just what I was. There was no hostility in her expression, no primal hatred from before, and I could almost imagine her as a human. She would have been pretty, I realized, with delicate facial features, high cheekbones, and a warm, friendly smile. A soft chirp broke the silent tension in the air, and the fiend jerked her head around to look on the tiny black cricket that had wandered into the shed. She bent low, her face level with the insect, and beamed at it in childish glee. Then she pursed her lips and chirped back in an almost perfect imitation of the bug's song. "Whoa, you can do that?" Before I could react, she snatched the cricket off the floor and popped it into her mouth, crunching it down happily. Something about the way the creature bobbed her head from side to side, like she just found her favorite snack, made a bubbling sensation well up inside my chest that hadn't been there for a long time. I laughed. She let slide a goofy grin and clicked in reply, hopping in a small circle on all fours, as though laughing herself. "Crickets, huh?" Giggling, I shook my head. "To each his own, I guess. You know, that would make a good name. You mind if I call you Cricket?" Whether she understood, I didn't know, as the otherworldly being just chittered back at me in a happy chorus, still doing her little shuffle dance. "There's an idea. Don't move." Dragging myself to my feet, I ran back to the parsonage and grabbed my phone. Cell service might have been garbage, but I could still play downloaded music, and with tentative hands I pressed play, waiting to see Cricket's reaction. She stared at the phone while a rock song played, and a small frown crossed her face. Cricket brought both hands up and covered her ears, making a disgusted grimace. "Not a fan, huh?" I tapped the skip button. "That's okay, not everyone's into rock. How about this?" A twangy, old-school song came on, and Cricket cautiously removed her fingers from her ears. She seemed a little more curious at this one, leaning closer. The second old hang started crooning his main chorus. Cricket threw back her head and howled in a wobbly imitation of him that almost seemed mocking. "Oof, sorry Hank, but she's got a point. That does sound familiar." I skipped to the next song, my phone randomly shuffling through the music that Stacy and I had accumulated over the handful of years we had together. How about something a little more modern? Of all things, one of Stacy's favorite songs blared to life, a guitar-heavy hippie song my starchy grandfather would have had an aneurysm from. Stacy loved it though, and I could still see her in my mind's eye, singing at the top of her lungs in the car, dark hair blowing in the wind, not caring how off-toned she was. God in heaven, I miss her. I blinked and found Cricket popping her head along to the beat, a small grin on her macabre face. She seemed to move more and more as the song progressed, fingers tapping on the floor, feet shifting from side to side, an eerie yet innocent attempt to normality. "You like this one?" My smile seemed to be reflected on her face, and Cricket chirped back in an excited, insistent tone. I got to my feet and Cricket shuffled in a circle, then jerked her head at me with an expectant set of clicks. She waited, refusing to continue without me, and a rush of embarrassed heat spilled over my face. I can't believe I'm doing this. Doing my best to remember the silly way he used to dance for his social media videos, I moved my feet and arms, much to Cricket's delight. The more I danced, the more I laughed, feeling lighter and freer than I had in weeks. Somehow, the strange creature had become part of my world, and despite the dreaded implications of what that meant, it was comforting to have someone to share with. Together we laughed and danced, each in our own way, me in the light, her in the darkness. Birds charged out of the treetops in alarm, and both Cricket and I froze, our eyes darting to the ridge where the explosion had come from. The sounds of fighting had been getting progressively worse every night, but it didn't usually happen in the day. By now, I'd assumed the shooting and detonations were the new wilderness staff doing their best to keep the fiends at bay in the same way I had, and to hear them firing in the daylight when we were supposed to be safe sent dread twisting in my guts. If they start moving in the day, I'm doomed. I'll never be able to hold them off by myself. Behind me, Cricket let something out like a whimper, and I turned to find her withdrawn into the shadows, with what could pass as fear scrawled across her pale face. "It's okay." The words burst from my mouth before I even had time to consider them. "It's alright, they're far away, they're over the ridge. You're safe here, I promise." Cricket's eyes flicked to my Winchester, which lay in the grass not far to my left. I always brought it, just in case. After all, I was defending myself, and these things had attacked me first, not the other way around. Yet, looking into her face, with the way she shrunk back into the shadows, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Cricket looked at me like I was the monster. I think that's enough for today. Pulling my gaze away from hers, I shut the shed door and locked it. "I'll be back later with dinner. Bye, Cricket." I thought she'd scream, throw a tantrum, something like what she usually done the past couple of nights. Instead, nothing but silence came from the little brown painted building, as though she didn't know quite what to do. If that truly was the case, then she was in good company. The rest of my day was spent doing more nervous work on the barricades, searching through Stacy's old nursing textbooks for anything that might help me figure out what could turn a person into a moon-eyed fiend, and trying to unsuccessfully call someone who could help me. Nothing yielded any positive results, save for the practical hands-on barricade work, and I thought about reinforcing the shed around Cricket to keep her secure at night. After due consideration, I decided that I didn't want to upset her with hammering on the shed walls, since I was making headway with her, and still felt bad about keeping her locked up. Towards evening, I did spot a few deer in the distant shade of the tree line, but they were much bigger than normal whitetail, and for some bizarre reason, their heads seemed to be only half covered in flesh, the white bone of their skulls exposed in some places, though I couldn't get close enough to see for sure. Despite this, they seemed rather healthy, and the males already wore a full set of antlers, the tines twisted like unsymmetrical tree branches. In the dark shadows of the clustered oaks, I could have sworn that I saw the antlers glow a soft, luminescent green whenever the bucks would throw back their heads, and below their calls, higher and more piercing than what I'd ever grown to recognize out here. This doesn't make any sense. Did some nuclear reactor spring a leak somewhere? Where is all this stuff coming from? Unnerved, I threw a cautious glance at the overcast sky, went back inside, and ignored the woods for the rest of the day. For dinner, I made Cricket another round of crumpled hamburger and brought her a faded blue wool blanket that I used for camping back in high school. At first, she didn't seem to understand how to use it, so I had to get another blanket from the house and demonstrate on the ground in front of her, like a kid playing camp out in the living room floor. Once she figured out the blanket was for sleeping and not eating, Cricket snuggled under it with the same contentment any dog or cat might have from such a thing, one of the blanket corners falling over a happy face in a disarming way. At least this time, when I locked her in for the night, I didn't feel quite as cruel now that I knew she had something to keep her warm with. And so again, I'm posting this at the beginning of the long, dark night. The other fiends are back, several little families wandering through the grass outside and screaming like banshees. A small herd of the bone-faced deer are grazing amongst the cemetery tombstones, keeping a wary distance from the humanoid fiends. And there are some strange, jet-black, lizard-like things flying around the treetops with backed wings the size of kites. Every night, my world seems to turn more and more upside down, new species emerging from the forest to greet me. But at least for tonight, the fiends have left the shed alone. Still, I'll have to keep one eye open while I sleep. I don't want them to get to Cricket. I doubt they hurt one of their own, but I have seen them fighting for scraps of rotten flesh, and I don't want one of the bigger males to steal Cricket's blanket. It sounds insane, even as I write this, but after all, I trapped her, so I believe it's my duty before God and man to keep her safe. Admittedly, I have no idea what I'm going to do, either about her or myself. My food stocks are vast, thanks to whoever left the parsonage to me, but not infinite. No one has come, not even to drive by on the country road. And aside from the gunshots over the ridge, I have no indication that there's anyone left in Barron County. For all I know, no, there is no point in wild speculation. I have to stay positive. Maybe I could try watching until first light, pack some basic gear and strike out for new wilderness to try and link up with the ranger force there. But then I'd have to leave Cricket behind, and I honestly can't stomach the idea of abandoning her to die of thirst or starvation in that dingy shed. I suppose I could let her go, but a part of me wants to help her. God did call me to lead lost souls to salvation, didn't he? Are these lost souls any different? They need proper food, shelter, medical attention. If there is no one else, then I must try to save them. Even if it means staying put, I owe Cricket that much. Time to get some sleep. I can feel my eyelids weighing heavily, and I'm starting to nod off at my desk. Besides, I'll just leave this post running on my laptop, and we'll see when the crappy service chooses to upload it. Tomorrow, I'll see about trying to teach Cricket to clean up, maybe even change her clothes. I think she'd like some new shoes.